Spies are pretty cool, aren't they? I mean, who doesn't dream about being stylish, suave, and decked out with sharp suits, cool gadgets, even cooler cars, and hot women? Especially hot women. I mean, Roald Dahl's adventures under the covers are legendary, and well, I would mention James Bond, but I don't think YouTube would appreciate Sean Connery's way of dealing with women. But you get the point. There is a certain lifestyle that's associated with spies that completely runs counter to reality. Since their job is to go undetected, the best spies are actually the ones that you don't notice. The stuffy nerd sitting in the corner of the office that no one cares about, who is so meek and non-threatening that it's just inconceivable that he could be an evil mastermind working for the enemy. And today's mad lad was such a complete loser that he actually managed to pull off possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history. Robert Hansen. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. Hey! Stop looking at my screen. I take my privacy very seriously, so I don't want you, the government, or any other ne'er-do-wells looking at the websites that I visit. And that is why I use Surfshark VPN. A VPN, or virtual private network, encrypts your data when you're connected to the internet to hide your activity from trackers and snoops, and allows you to connect to servers all over the world. Such a service is essential on public Wi-Fi where anyone can be watching, and Surfshark's no logs policy means that even they can't see what you're doing. So, the only person who knows what pony sites I like to frequent is me. And of course, you can use your VPN to access the different libraries of streaming services across the globe. But did you know that you can also use it for shopping sites? For instance, Dick's Sporting Goods is only available in America, which is a shame because you all know how much I love Dick's. But all I have to do is set my VPN to an American server and I can browse to my heart's content. But that's not all, because Surfshark also provides an antivirus which regularly scans my devices for anything nasty and notifies me if any malicious files are downloaded. It's like ivermectin for my computer. Those ponies won't be giving me worms. And the best part is that Surfshark's antivirus also prevents unwanted programs from accessing my webcam. So no one can see me pogging as Ponyville is saved. So, if you want to browse safely, check out Surfshark and install it on as many devices as you want, because there's no limit. And if you have any trouble, there's 24/7 customer service and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So, click the link in the description box down below to get an extra 4 months. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some private browsing to do. On the 18th of April 1944, Robert Philip Hansen was born in Chicago as the son and grandson of cops, and as the son of a Chicago cop, little Hansen had almost cartoonish daddy issues, having once been rolled into a carpet as a punishment and then being spun in the air until he was sick, while also being regularly belittled and humiliated publicly. Instead of building character and a thick skin, Hansen built a massive chip in his shoulder, one that he would carry for the rest of his life. After growing up, Hansen proved himself to be pretty clever, earning himself a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Knox College with a minor in Russian. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. But anyway, from there, he applied to become a cryptographer at the NSA, but was turned down due to budget constraints. So, a change in career was in order. Hansen's dad wanted him to become a doctor, but he found himself in dental school instead, which is where we start to see some of the rather strange traits beginning to emerge. For instance, he always wore the exact same black suit, even in the dissecting lab, which soon caused problems for his roommate, who complained that, and I quote, "The suit smelled of formaldehyde and he was hanging up each night in our room. Our place reeked of the cadaver. I finally had to ask him to get it dry cleaned." But in addition to being a fucking weirdo, Hansen also spent his time at dental school showing off a surprising level of genius. For instance, instead of taking notes during a lecture, he simply wrote the word bicuspid and then doodled a bird and a naked woman. This was noticed by the professor, who didn't appreciate Hansen's artistic expression and chewed him out for not paying attention and wasting a place in a professional institution. Incensed, Hansen cut the professor off and told him to get back to the lecture. When he did, Hansen heckled him by word perfectly, repeating the whole lecture up to that point. A severely disrespectful move made by an arrogant arsehole. But I can't deny that is pretty impressive. Eventually, Hansen gets sick of dentistry and dropped out after a single year because, and I quote, "I don't think I want to spend my life picking pieces off of someone's teeth." For his next career change, Hansen considered a career in psychiatry, but ultimately settled on getting a master's in business administration from Northwestern University before following in his father and grandfather's footsteps by joining the Chicago Police Department, where he was trained in counterintelligence and worked as part of a unit investigating dirty cops. In the business, etc., etc. But then, surprise, surprise, Hansen got sick of that as well. So it was time for yet another career change. So he applied to join the FBI. And he got rejected, but he applied again and finally got in 1976, swearing to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, both foreign and domestic. In the business, I'll stop now. And this time, the career change would stick, because Hansen grew up absolutely devouring spy stories, including The Codebreakers by David Kahn. He was also a massive James Bond fan, so much so that he actually owned two of Bond's favourite gun, the Walther PPK. And he really wanted to become a spy so that he could be all cool and catch other spies. He did not get to do that. Instead, he spent 2 years going after white-collar criminals in Indiana. But once he'd paid his dues and he had become a bit more seasoned, Hansen got to work with the big boys, being reassigned to counterintelligence in New York City. But Hansen being Hansen, he immediately began trying to make his mark on the place like he did at dental school, seeking to implement improvements as he saw fit. However, the feds were not very receptive to his ideas, because why would they be? That smarmy little upstart had only just arrived, and now he's telling us what to do. And like most things, Hansen took this as a personal slight, and on some level, it was because Hansen was just not liked at all by his colleagues in the FBI, for a whole laundry list of reasons. For one, he just would not stop trying to get his colleagues to go to Opus Dei meetings with him, because why go for beers after work when you can join a secretive, ultra-conservative Catholic sect that many people see as a cult? Like, self-flagellating, ultra-conservative stuff. And since Hansen was an American boomer, he was very obnoxious about religion, so he was constantly bringing it up in every conversation. Also, being 32 years old, he was a fair bit older than some of his fellow recruits, and he was very condescending towards them and also his superiors. His sense of self-importance was so out of control that he was even a complete prick to his superiors. But by far the biggest target of Hansen's ire was women. The most notable incident being when he shoved a female administrative assistant to the ground when she tried to leave a meeting to catch her lift home. She wanted to pursue assault charges, but the feds decided to handle this situation internally, suspending Hansen for just 5 days. But on the bright side, this little fracas de facto ended his career, because from that point onwards, he was stuck riding a desk forever, since he clearly wasn't fit for any kind of authority or work with people. The aggrieved assistant also claimed that Hansen was just an absolute creep around women and would very often try to rub up against them. I know that the word misogynist is very overused as an insult at this point, but in Hansen's case, he was pretty much just like that. But that's not to say that his horrendous temper wasn't applied universally. In addition to the assault, Hansen verbally abused all of his colleagues and those below him, who duly called him the mortician and Dr. Death behind his back. Because what better nickname is there for a miserable old fuck who dressed in black suits and literally smelled like corpses in college? But Hansen wasn't just off-putting at work. According to the Washington Post, neighbours and family members described him as cerebral and standoffish, with one saying that, and I quote, "He would say hello, but he was so quiet. He wouldn't say much else." Truly, no one in Hansen's life actually liked him. Well, except for a fellow analyst and carpool partner, Paul Moore, who recalled, "This was a man who had a lot of compartments in his life. I was not his naughty friend, I was his nice friend, and we had a relationship where it was very good. It was very positive for the both of us. There's absolutely no doubt that I'm a better person for having known Bob Hansen." But Moore was Hansen's friend. Somehow. So of course he would have something nice to say about the man. But how good was he at his job, really? Well, according to his boss, I thought he was an intelligent guy, but he was an introvert. Most agents, they're introverts, but the ideal agent is a used car salesman. You've got to be able to sell yourself. Hansen simply didn't have any interpersonal skills. He was able to see problems, see solutions, and implement them. His solutions were not always easy for his peers to follow. He would have to explain them, and he did not suffer fools gladly. You can only go so far on brains alone. You still have to have personal skills to rise up in management. So Robert Hansen was a shit leader with a god-awful personality that made him so useless in the field that he never got to go out and recruit defecting Soviets. And he was completely unsuited to the more exciting work like solving bank robberies and going after the mob. But he was a gifted analyst who liked the long, slow, and unglamorous counterintelligence work. Fucking nerd. You know how if you've got a healthy work-life balance that you're not supposed to take your work home with you? Well, Hansen did not leave his above-it-all bullshit at the office. He also saw himself as way above his station in his personal life, having married up as he saw it because his wife Bonnie had a more affluent background than he did. And Hansen was such a raging narcissist that he needed to LARP as successful, with the big house, fancy lifestyle, and exciting job, even though he was just a nerdy desk jockey that constantly annoyed everyone around him. He was the office Jerry, and he took his resentment out on his wife, not treating her particularly well. He took the trad LARP way too far by trying to run an authoritarian household in a really petty and honestly quite amusing way. For instance, after Bonnie made him breakfast, Hansen stopped eating halfway through and just stared at his empty mug. Apparently, that was his father's way of telling his mother that he wanted another coffee. However, Bonnie did not take his shit for long, telling him, "Well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to speak up around here." absolutely longhoused. She also didn't take his shit when Hansen would slowly tip over a glass, waiting to see if Bonnie would run over and catch it before it spilled. Instead, she made him lie in that bed that he made. But, to be completely fair though, that is psycho behaviour. You surely get the idea by now. Hansen was a deeply, deeply resentful man who didn't think he had the respect or positions that he deserved, and he took it out on everyone that he knew. If you think I've been abusing the Michael Jordan meme that I've been using throughout this video, it's really not an exaggeration. Hansen saw each and every career setback and rejection as a personal failure and slight against him and his intellect and his abilities. So, in 1979, after 3 years of perceived humiliation, he decided to work for someone who might appreciate him. And his new role would be a childhood dream come true, because as Hansen later admitted to his new bosses, I decided on this course when I was 14 years old. I'd read Philby's book. Now, that is insane, eh? Well, he's right, that is insane because Philby's book wasn't even published until Hansen was 24. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, Kim Philby was a British spy who was a double agent for the Soviets, who managed to defect to Moscow after he was discovered. That's right, Hansen decided to start selling secrets to the Soviet Union. Hansen rocked up to Amtorg's New York office, which was a front for Soviet intelligence, and he anonymously gave them a package that contained the name of an FBI mole to kickstart their professional relationship. He wasn't even recruited, he didn't even negotiate the terms of and compensation for his treason. He just volunteered and took whatever the Soviets felt like giving him. And just like that, Hansen was working for the GRU, operating under code names like Ramon Garcia, Jim Baker, and B. Hansen was in the perfect position for spycraft, not just because he had access to all of the good shit and the training to do it all undetected, but because he was chained to a desk and everyone hated him. So, he had free rein to spend hours and hours trawling through the FBI and State Department computer systems from the privacy of his office. In fact, not only did he have full access, but he'd even helped to actually set up the intelligence investigative system, which contained all of the information that agents learned about Soviet targets, in addition to the names of every FBI asset in New York. It also helped that security was a joke, being no more than routine security clearance. So getting to the very classified material was very easy. As Hansen himself bragged, any clerk in the bureau could come up with stuff on that system. It's criminal how it's laid out. But despite his mastery of the computer system, Hansen avoided detection by going analog. For the next 20 years, on and off, Hansen delivered state secrets by means of dead drops for his handlers around New York and DC, leaving documents and other goodies in plastic bags for the Soviets to pick up. His handlers also never knew his real name or even met him in person, so correspondence to him was addressed as Dear Friend. However, no OPSEC is perfect, and despite his know-how and professed genius, he was caught barely a year into his spying career. While hiding top-secret documents in his basement, Hansen was caught by Bonnie. But then he went into secret agent mode and tried to bluff his way out of trouble by telling her that he was feeding the Russians false information. Of course, there was never any point where he was actually authorized to do so, but I don't think the lie really worked, because Bonnie made him confess to an Opus Dei priest, who said that he wouldn't report him if he stopped spying and gave his ill-gotten gains to charity. You would think that Hansen could just ignore the priest's warning and keep doing what he was doing, because if that priest made good on that threat, then he would have gone straight to hell for breaking the confessional seal. It's why mafia guys were able to confess to their priests about the murders they had committed without fear of prosecution. Because that shit is sacred. But while he was perfectly willing to betray his country, Hansen was very serious about staying on the right side of the Lord. So he kept his word and he stopped spying. For a while. And he even donated the money that he made despite putting himself at risk of bankruptcy. Then he was transferred to DC to work in a couple of positions, but he kept his head down. He'd had his little jaunt as a spy, and he could now quit while he was ahead and just get on with the rest of his career. However, in 1983, Hansen was promoted. He became a field supervisor at the Soviet Counterintelligence Division in New York, and he was given clearance above top secret level. Old habits die hard, so 9 days later he was working for the KGB. In one drop, he sent a letter to KGB Colonel Viktor Degtyaryar on the 4th of October 1985. It contained an envelope that read, "Do not open, take this letter to Viktor Cherkashin." The addressee was the head of Soviet espionage in DC, to whom Hansen sold out 3 double agents that were working for the United States. Sergei Motorin and Valery Martinov were actually fucking executed, and Boris Yuzhin was put away for a very long time. For the names, Hansen asked for $100,000, but the Soviets only gave him $50,000, and Hansen just thanked them, not even bothering to haggle for a better deal. Hansen's fun then got even better in 1987, when he was put in charge of a task force looking for a mole who had compromised 3 double agents. He got put in charge of the task force that was looking for him. He got to give the feds the absolute runaround and thought he was so fucking clever that he could avoid detection because he knew both the Americans and the Russians so well that they could be easily outsmarted. As Hansen bragged, "I know better than most what minefields are laid and the risks." In a broken clock moment, Hansen also called the US a powerfully built but retarded child, potentially dangerous but young, immature and easily manipulated. It is also one that can turn ingenious quickly, like an idiot savant. In fact, Hansen thought so much of himself that he joked to them about retiring to the USSR to teach their spies. According to former KGB General Oleg Kalugin, he would show a kind of superiority. He believed that he could handle his case better than the Russians because he knew the Russian pattern of behaviour, and he thought that if he succumbed to the Russian ways, he may be exposed earlier. But Hansen managed to maintain a degree of professional detachment from his masters and stopped spying in 1991, when things were starting to look very, very bad for the Soviets. But again, you know what they say about old habits. Not even the collapse of the Soviet Union could truly stop Hansen. He merely continued to sell secrets to the newly formed Russian Federation, starting work for the SVR in 1999. By this point, Hansen had risen to the position of FBI liaison to the US State Department, because the feds basically invoked the Dilbert principle to get him the fuck out of HQ until retirement. But while they had gotten rid of him once and for all, he was also basically completely unsupervised. Over the course of his entire career, Hansen did an insane amount of damage to American intelligence by handing over a massive trove of devastating information. Thousands of classified documents, including 50 human sources or recruitment targets, the targets of nuclear strikes were the US to press the big red button, an intended response to a first strike by Russia, so essentially the whole game plan for World War III, the existence of a secret eavesdropping tunnel built under the Soviet embassy in Washington, which ruined the entire extremely expensive project, and worst of all, the identities of over a dozen US agents in Russia, at least 3 of whom were executed. One of these betrayals was the worst thing that Hansen ever did, because General Dmitry Polyakov, a CIA informant codenamed Top Hat, had been America's most important asset in the GRU since the early 60s. And he was executed after Hansen sold him out. For his treason, Hansen was paid more than $1.4 million spread across a number of assets. $600,000 in cash, Rolex watches, diamonds, and $800,000 in Russian accounts. And it would have come in very handy because legitimate money was very tight in the Hansen household. A $40,000 FBI analyst salary doesn't exactly cut it when you're living in areas as expensive as DC and New York. And a lot of agents struggled to the point where half of the traitors did so purely for money. Who would have thought that a rookie in the New York office making less than a bin man would have become a security risk? Well, when DC ignored the warnings of Hansen's boss, Thomas Scheer, about this massive problem, Scheer quit. And we all know what Hansen did. But despite the ample returns from the trade of his soul, Hansen was very smart about enjoying his wealth. He lived modestly in a 4-bedroom Virginia house with his 6 children. Because Catholic, he drove a Ford Taurus and a minivan, and holidays were nothing more than visits to his parents in Florida with the kids sleeping on the floor. However, he could have splashed a bit of it on his kids' expensive Catholic school instead of taking out mortgages. He even wrote to his handlers to ask not to be paid too much because it could raise suspicions. To further protect himself, he also regularly checked FBI computers to make sure that they weren't onto him. But why would they be? After all, Hansen kept a squeaky clean image as a very strict Catholic, having followed his wife and becoming a member of Opus Dei. He portrayed himself as a good, God-fearing anti-communist who railed against the Soviets, who he said were all doomed to fail because commies don't have God in their lives. He also kept a crucifix above his desk, he went to Mass every day, he went to confessions every week, and even went to anti-abortion rallies. Broken clocks and all that. But despite the whole Boy Scout routine, treason wasn't the only skeleton in Hansen's closet. He was into some pretty weird sex stuff. He actually filmed sex tapes of himself and his wife without her knowledge to then show to a friend who also got the occasional covert live show. He was also active on exhibitionist websites where he posted nudes of and stories about his own wife online. But who the fuck would want to sit in the cuck chair for Hansen? He was a schlubby nerd with an inflated ego. Even though Hansen's tastes were absolutely unholy, he still somehow managed to obnoxiously inject religion into everything. He had a habit of visiting strip clubs and trying to convert the strippers to Catholicism. In 1990, he took a particular shine to one coke-addicted stripper named Priscilla Sue Gray, showering her with gifts like a paid-up Amex card, dental work, jewellery, and a Mercedes, as well as taking her on holidays for 2 years. And $80,000 later, Hansen didn't even fuck her. He just wanted to help her find God. I mean, based if that is what he was actually trying to do, but I don't think it was. Eventually, this weird little relationship ended exactly how you'd expect. Gailey went home to Ohio, got hooked on crack, and started abusing the Amex card. So Hansen personally travelled over there to take it off of her, completely cutting her off. A year later, Gailey was arrested on drug charges and Hansen hung her out to dry, abandoning her to a fate involving prostitution, complicity in drug trafficking charges, a wrecked car, and the pawning of all of the other stuff that Hansen gave her. She even somehow managed to lose the dentures. Not that Hansen letting Gailey's life go to complete shit is surprising though, because this fucker was not loyal. But back to the main betrayal. After 6,000 documents and 26 computer disks were handed over and more than 20 dead drops, the Americans smelled a rat. In 1994, the CIA arrested Aldrich Ames, who was the most damaging traitor of all time. Until now, who did a level of damage that is still unaccounted for. But when the leaks didn't end after Ames was caught, the spooks knew that there was another mole still at large. However, we all know how competent the feds are. They were way off in their hunt. Instead of looking inwards and keeping their own house in order, the FBI hounded a CIA agent named Brian Kelly, thinking that he was the mole due to his involvement in a counterintelligence case that went awry, and also a map of his jogging routes in a park that matched the locations of dead drops. For 3 years, Kelly was suspended as the feds went after him and harassed his family with extreme prejudice. And after his name was eventually cleared, he never sued them for some reason. He just went back to work as normal without even an apology from the feds. That little episode was such a shit show because the feds and the CIA didn't really get very good at working together until after 9/11. Up to that point, they were more like rivals and enemies than colleagues, which is strange because the CIA does all of the exact same things as the FBI, but to brown people. But in the end, the feds were bailed out of having to do any decent investigative work by a Russian asset named Alexander Sherbakov, who delivered the smoking gun that they needed in September of the year 2000. He handed over Hansen's file. The feds paid him $7 million and the CIA picked the file up from the embassy. And as far as public knowledge is concerned, the Russians never figured out that it was Sherbakov who handed it over. He actually defected to the United States in 2010. And also, that price tag is a Guinness World Record for the most amount of money paid for intelligence, because apparently they've got a record for everything. I also think that that's probably not true, because there have probably been much bigger payments that we just don't know about. And this file had everything. Dates, times, voice recordings, and a fragment of a bin bag that was used for a dead drop that had fingerprints on it. The feds immediately ran those prints and got a hit on Hansen. Then some analysts listened to the voice recordings and they all went, that's fucking Robert Hansen from down the hall. And of course, the Russians didn't know Hansen's real name or anything like that, but one of the voice recordings had him saying a pithy, obscene catchphrase that he stole from Patton, which plenty of the guys in the office all recognised. Hansen got cool head logicianed. With this bombshell reveal, the feds realised that they'd missed a lot of red flags, such as Hansen regularly trolling their automated case support system and the State Department's computer systems for information. What really blinded the feds was the fact that they simply just didn't want to believe that it was Hansen. Sure, a rat in the CIA was perfectly possible, but in the FBI, one of our guys, preposterous. Therefore, the feds missed a number of red flags, even though Hansen had a history of violating protocol. Even when he wasn't handing over state secrets, he was very loose-lipped with classified information, and his brother-in-law actually snitched on him in 1990 after his wife found $5,000 in a drawer and heard him talking about retiring to Poland. Across the Iron Curtain. However, to be fair, Hansen's wife later denied the existence of the cash while passing a polygraph as part of an 8-hour interrogation that also made it clear that she knew nothing at all beyond that single episode in 1980. But the fingerprints and recordings on file weren't enough. The feds wanted to be absolutely sure that there could be no way for Hansen to dodge the book when they threw it at him. So they intended to catch him in the act and make sure that the charges stuck. But time was short because Hansen was planning to retire. So the feds bought a house across the road from him and put him under constant surveillance and got to work. What became known as Operation Grey Suit commenced. In January of 2001, a bunch of feds in the office took one for the team because Hansen was transferred back to the FBI, dropped in an office that was heavily wiretapped and filled with hidden cameras, and given a fake assignment to search for a mole. To this end, he was equipped with a computer containing fake intelligence and given no access to any real classified information. He also had an assistant, by far the most important of the 300 agents on this case, a 27-year-old rookie named Eric O'Neill, codename Werewolf. Gay, but being tech-savvy, he was the perfect fit for a fake op about cybersecurity. Though it was a tough assignment because Hansen was a really shit boss, and O'Neill had to put up with him day in and day out. As he recalled, we could barely fit in there with Hansen's ego. He had an immense amount of pride, he had an immense amount of hubris. He talked about his amazing accomplishments, some true and many he completely made up, whole cloth ad nauseum. Obnoxiousness aside, spies like it when their marks talk. So O'Neill tried to be friendly by kicking off his working relationship with the codenamed Grey Day by using a riff on the tried and true "So about that game last night." He asked Hansen what he thought of the Washington Redskins, and Hansen replied, "Football is a barbaric sport and the only people dumber than the players who play it are those who watch it." You know, like an arsehole. Later in the conversation, Hansen cut O'Neill off and said, "Do you know what it takes to be a counterintelligence agent?" Little did he know. But as insufferable as this was, O'Neill had an in. If he let Hansen treat him like a protege, he was off to the races because, and I quote, he wanted to be a mentor. He wanted to impart all of his knowledge onto someone. O'Neill also ran a distraction by taking Hansen to the gun range while other agents searched his car, finding top-secret documents. Keeping tabs on the car over the next few months also led the feds to the dead drop signal, when they spotted Hansen repeatedly driving past a specific utility pole just a mile away from his house. Another breakthrough eventually occurred when O'Neill noticed that Hansen was obsessed with an early 2000s gadget called a Palm Pilot, which he believed would have all sorts of goodies on it. An FBI assistant director, who Hansen wasn't particularly fond of, duly took one for the team by challenging him to a shooting competition with $20 on the line, which got Hansen out of the office. O'Neill immediately went into Hansen's bag, got the Palm Pilot, a floppy disk, and a data card out of there. And then he booked it down 3 flights of stairs to the team who were standing by to copy all of the information off of the devices. After a painfully slow and cinematic progress bar filled up, the team got word that Hansen was heading back early. So the techies gave O'Neill the stuff back and just said, "Run." O'Neill then booked it back to the office, but he realised that he had forgotten which of the 4 pockets in Hansen's bag he'd removed the devices from. While fearing for his life if his tampering were to be discovered, O'Neill took a guess just in time for Hansen to arrive. But Hansen just curtly gave a few instructions and then immediately left. But it was all worth it, because when the copied data was decrypted, the feds found the schedule for the dead drops. And the next one was 3 days away. After a 22-year spying career, Hansen was just 5 weeks from retirement as he prepared to make his final dead drop on the 18th of February 2001, unaware that the feds were one step ahead, having already found a bag containing his payment of $50,000. But instead of grabbing it, they simply took pictures of everything and put it all back and waited. There was still work to do. As usual, the goods were in a plastic bin bag that Hansen brought to Foxton Park, near his home in Virginia, where he then placed them under a bridge for the Russians to collect. And as he did so, he was caught red-handed and surrounded by 10 agents, to whom he asked, "What took you so long?" Among the stuff in Hansen's dead drop was a disc with a rather interesting letter, which read, "Dear friends, I thank you for your assistance these many years. It seems, however, that my greatest utility to you has come to an end, and it is time to seclude myself from active service. I have been promoted to a higher do-nothing senior executive job outside of regular access to information within the counterintelligence program. I am being isolated. Further, I believe I have detected repeated bursting radio signals emanating from my vehicle. The knowledge of their existence is sufficient. Amusing the games that children play. Something has aroused the sleeping tiger. Perhaps you know better than I. Life is full of its ups and downs. I will be in contact next year, same time, same place. Perhaps the correlation of forces and circumstances then will have improved. Your friend, Ramon Garcia." Amusing the games that children play. Hansen thought he was so fucking clever and that the feds were so stupid that despite having noticed crackling on his car radio caused by the bug, the arrogant fuck went right through with the dead drop anyway. I mean, it was the very last drop. What could possibly go wrong? And as General Kalugan put it, he thought he was a better protector of himself, and I think that's why he made the mistake. He thought he would know better, and he was wrong. Therefore, the arrogant fuck was caught just in the nick of time. And look at this gay mugshot of Hansen in his turtleneck. Is that your spy turtleneck? Did you actually wear a gay spy turtleneck to the dead drops? You absolute fucking loser. On the 6th of July 2001, Hansen took a seat right over there. In the dock, pleading guilty to 15 counts of espionage because he was going to get fucking executed if he didn't. As part of the plea deal, Hansen also took part in a massive debrief with the government in exchange for his life. For 200 hours over 75 days, he was interrogated. But despite the fact that his life was on the line, he didn't play ball, hand-waving away contradictory and inconsistent answers to the Fed's questions by saying, "I have a bad memory." And then he got very upset when a polygraph examiner told him that he was being evasive. But despite his almost suicidal obstinacy, Hansen also spent a lot of time talking to a psychologist, to whom he expressed some remorse and rationalized his actions by arguing that showing the Russians that US plans were less hostile than expected would have lowered tensions on both sides. Cool motive, probably bullshit, still treason. Even if he genuinely believed that, he got at least 3 men killed. Despite being so Hansen about his interrogation, the arrogant fuck had said enough to consider his side of the bargain fulfilled, because as part of the plea deal, his wife got to keep the house and her $38,000 annual widow's pension. Naturally, this upset a number of feds, who lamented that if Hansen had been arrested after September 11th, 2001, there would have been no question of a deal or pension, and he would be on death row. But on the bright side, they took solace in the fact that, and I quote, "Hansen will not adjust well to life in prison. His arrogance will have to be knocked out of him, either by correctional officers or the other prisoners." And Hansen would have plenty of time to have the arrogance knocked out of him, because as punishment for what the prosecutor, Paul J. McNulty, said will long be remembered as being among the most egregious betrayals of trust in US history, Hansen was handed 15 life sentences with no chance of parole on the 10th of May 2002. And just like that, his new home was a tiny cell in ADX Florence, a very, very special prison for very, very special prisoners. That's where Ted Kaczynski was kept, and it's where El Chapo is being kept right now. Basically, the entire roster of ADX Florence is people that you've heard of. It's basically a giant building of potential mad lads. At his sentencing, Hansen came out with a very too little too late statement. I apologise for my behaviour. I am shamed by it. I have opened the door for calumny against my totally innocent wife and children. I have hurt so many deeply. Yeah, because opening the door to slander against your family is what you did wrong, never mind the people that you betrayed and got killed. Oh, and also, he wasn't even referring to that. He was sorry for all of the weird sex stuff going public. Nevertheless, Hansen's apology was accepted because despite everything, his wife and kids kept up weekly visits, with his wife insisting that, I'll never divorce him, I love him, and I'll pray for the salvation of his soul every day for the rest of my life. How the hell did an absolute cretin like Hansen manage to land himself such a good woman? And of course, there's nothing like a mother's love, because Hansen's mother Vivian moved over from Florida to be nearer to her son. However, while he had a bit of company every so often, Hansen still spent the rest of his life sitting in solitary for 23 hours a day, until he died alone in his cell on the 5th of June 2023. But not of anything exciting. At 79 years old, it was just natural causes and the strain of 2 decades in ADX Florence. Womp womp. Needless to say, Hansen left behind a bit of a mess. After he was arrested, relations between the United States and Russia were somewhat tense for a while. To save face, Bush Jr. expelled 50 Russian diplomats, and Putin naturally had to respond in kind. Though both sides wanted the episode to end there, since this was back when they were still looking to patch things up with each other after the USSR collapsed. However, the fallout within the FBI was considerably worse, as the FBI went, fuck, who catches the spy catchers? I would say that this would have been pretty devastating and damaging to the FBI's credibility, but, well, it's the FBI. The Feds started to strengthen their insider threat programs by increasing polygraphs and assessments of personnel, and scrutinising finances and travel. But it's just a fact that no matter what they do, they can't ever rule out the possibility of there being other moles. But despite the abject failure, the Feds got a big pat in the back from the director after Hansen was arrested, who said, I am immensely proud of the men and women who conducted this investigation. Their actions represent counterintelligence at its very best, and under the most difficult and sensitive of circumstances. And McNulty said that the whole affair was a low point and an investigative success for the FBI. But with all of it said and done, there still remains one question. Why? What was it all for? It's hard to know for certain because there are a number of varied and conflicting accounts and reports, including from Hansen himself. He admitted outright that he did it for the money. But he also said, and I quote, fear and rage. Fear of being a failure and fear of not being able to provide for my family. O'Neill certainly believed that Hansen's motives were mercenary in nature, saying, and I quote, he truly didn't respect Russia very much, at least not in his conversations with me. But he was able to use them very effectively to solve his other problems. One, that he was angry at the FBI for not placing him in the position of authority and gravitas and respect that he believed he deserved. And two, he needed money. He was financially having problems, and he needed money. And you solve both of these problems by becoming a spy. However, Hansen kept going past the point of needing money, and even got back in the saddle after getting out twice. So there had to be a lot more to it than simply money and resentment for the Feds. according to O'Neill, at some point, spying and being the top spy for the Soviet Union while within the FBI became the thing that made him belong to something much bigger than himself. I think that at some point, even more than the money, that became what was so important to him. So, it could have been just prestige that Hansen wanted. And if he wasn't going to get it from the feds, then he would just get it from the Soviets. And an author by the name of Larry Schiller concurred, saying that he wanted to succeed. He wanted to become an important person. That wasn't going to happen in the FBI. Spying, being the best spy in the world, did satisfy some of his desires and needs of being the best. He also touched on the idea that in addition to recognition, Hansen wanted to simply be the best, which was something that O'Neill also noticed when he said it was the thing that made him feel that he was the best at something in the world. No one was better, and he knew that it was going to make him immortal. And it did. Now, that makes a lot of sense. Everything that we've seen of Hansen's character so far screams nothing but arrogance, ego, resentment, and attention-seeking. So, why do I think he did it? Well, when you're looking to take a character like Hansen down a peg, there is nothing more cutting than Occam's razor. Money was certainly a factor, sure, but it wouldn't be too hard to say that he essentially broke bad because he wanted to feel like a big man. But to be honest, I think it's just because he was a prick.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody just subscribe!